Hello, I'm Chris Richmond, and today I'm exploring one of Norfolk's historic roads. Now, forget the Norfolk Broads. Today it's all about the Norfolk B roads, specifically the B1110, which currently runs north from the mid-Norfolk town of Dereham to the Georgian market town of Holt. Said to be the geographical centre of Norfolk, Dereham, which gets its name from a homestead which kept deer, has always relied heavily on its roads. With no navigable waterways running nearby, the nearest seaports were either King's Lynn to the west, or the North Norfolk harbour of Cley. Is it a coincidence that the route pretty much links to the latter? After all, Cley Port was once part of the manor of Holt. This north-south route is said to have existed long before the Norman conquest and was historically used by pilgrims travelling to the religious sites of Briningham, Walsingham and North Elmham, the latter once being the episcopal throne of East Anglia. Today, the route is marked by a series of historic milestones, which I'll be showing you along the way. The first of which is just a stone's throw from Dereham's marketplace. In this rather busy corner of Dereham, outside the George and Dragon Inn, lies this small example, which is said to have been placed here to benefit those travelling to and from London during the age of the travelling coach in the 18th and 19th centuries. It denotes the distances in miles to London and the next town, Watton, 10 miles away.
I think the pub would have put that up for the benefit of coach travellers and, to advertise them a bit.
Helping me uncover the history of this ancient route is road historian and Milestone Society member Carol Haynes.
It did have a regular coach service. I mean, if you look in the old trade directories, certainly in the early 1800s, there was a regular coach service starting from the Feathers in Holt and going down through Dereham, and it went to London, and by the 1840s that was going 3 times a week. So I think the Milestones were put up, I think partly for the benefit of coach travellers, because quite a few of them have the London mileage on them. They were also put up to regulate the cost of hiring post horses and a post chaise. In Parson Woodford's diary, he comes up from London by stagecoach and then he stays in Norwich for a few nights to recover from his journey, and then he hires a post chaise to come out to his parsonage at Weston Longville. And a post chaise was a carriage which was really for 2 people and pulled by 2 horses, one of which had the postilion on it.
A far cry from the days of post horses. Today, Dereham's 1960s post office stands on Quebec Street, and our route heads north up Quebec Road. Heading out of town, the route has been significantly modernised and widened, with 2 milestones lost in the process.
I've never seen them, they must have gone some time ago. Roads were altered and the highway authorities, they didn't take much notice of them in those days, and a lot of them were got rid of.
Today, this part of the route is actually now part of the B1146, which veers off to the left just outside the village of Beatley to head towards Fakenham. At one stage, the B1110 would have started much further south in Thetford, but during the Second World War, the road was curtailed by the designation of the Stanford Battle Area north of Croxton, with a new Thetford to Dereham route becoming designated the A1075, leaving only this northern section remaining. Just to add to the confusion, the designation also briefly covered a section of road east of Dereham, formerly the A47 before the new Dereham to North Tuddenham bypass was put in. Now, where were we? North of the crossroads, the next surviving milestone on our journey is just outside the village of Beatley, near a former gravel pit. Half buried in the grass here, this stone is very typical of the style we see in this series of stones along the route, with its dome top and inset flat faces denoting the miles. The next stone in the series was just past the curiously named Spong Farm, but you won't see it. Nobody's seen it for years. Rumour has it that it was buried under a verge during some roadworks. Over the crest of the hill, the road then brings us into North Elmham, a historic village which was once the episcopal throne of East Anglia. Now here in North Elmham we don't have a milestone as such, but instead we have this wonderful plaque built into the wall here. There's actually 2 of these along the route, but this is by far the best preserved of the 2. The London mileage probably denotes its age as being from the travelling coach era, but as I mentioned before, this route was historically used by pilgrims, and just up the hill was once the principal seat of the bishops of East Anglia. Just off the side of the road, under the shadow of the imposing St Mary's Church, hides a remnant of the village's important past as a centre of religious power. These flint ruins are said to be on the site of the Anglo-Saxon cathedral. However, the ruins you see here actually derive from the footings of a private chapel constructed by Bishop Herbert de la Singa between 1091 and 1119, after the seat of the diocese was moved to Thetford. Almost 200 years later, the building fell into the hands of the unpopular Bishop Henry de Spencer, who modified it to become a fortified manor house. In the years following de Spencer's death, the building gradually fell into ruin, and today these ruins are cared for by English Heritage. Heading north through the village, there is one more roadside relic which catches attention. This was the village pound. Apparently most villages would have had one of these, and they would have been used for holding stray livestock which had escaped from their owners' plots. They would have been held here by the pinder until their rightful owner paid a fee to collect them. Owners could also have their animals impounded as a form of punishment, for example if they owed a debt. This example was built in around 1830 and is now a scheduled monument. Leaving the village behind, we continue north. There's so much history along this route. We're now about to pass a road to an old railway station called County School, which is now part of the preserved Mid-Norfolk Railway. And just up here, opposite these council houses, is our next surviving milestone, which is now the home of Wavy Dave. That's not his real name. This guy has been waving to passing traffic for what seems like decades. Since leaving Dereham, the road has run parallel with the former Great Eastern Railway line from Wymondham to Wells. About a mile north of North Elman, their paths converge as the road takes a sharp right turn under the former railway bridge. These abutments would have carried the railway from Dereham on its merry way to Fakenham and Wells. A couple of years ago it used to flood pretty badly, and after a number of unsuccessful attempts by contractors to alleviate the problem, it took a young lad with local knowledge to locate and dig out the drains to solve the problem. And it hasn't flooded since. The bridge is located in the tiny hamlet of Broome Green, a cluster of cottages centred around a small pond. It was once home to a Methodist chapel, which was abandoned over 50 years ago as the local Methodist community dwindled. Constructed in 1886, the remains of the building were recently uncovered from the ivy, and you can once again see it from the roadside. A few hundred yards up the road is our next milestone, which noticeably stands out from the foliage with its gleaming white paint. As you can probably tell, many of these historic milestones have been restored in recent years. This is all down to the hard work of one local man called Nigel Ford.
I think I restored and repainted approximately 150 milestones in Norfolk.
Nigel's hard work saw many of Norfolk's neglected milestones rescued from hedges and verges, including this one, which was completely dug out and reinstalled in 2012.
We had a good band, about half a dozen dedicated people.
It was Nigel Ford really who, when he had better health, he did an awful lot of work on them in restoration, and he managed to get quite a few local people to adopt them and look after them just to make sure that they were still okay and clear the vegetation. That's the main thing, because they're very much at risk from verge mowers.
Well, it came back when I saw a milestone at Barbara. He was hit by a flail cutter and I got really sad about it. So I wrote to the EDP and a letter was published, and Carol contacted me and I joined the Milestone Society. And that was at the point in time I was taking early retirement. I'd all been a bit of a workaholic, and after that I just went crackers over it. So that was basically it, that was how it started.
He's done a terrific job. But you know, as his health has deteriorated, he can't do so much now. But he's doing a lot from his home and on his computer to try and get parish councils interested. A lot of them are much more sympathetic.
Heading north from this milestone, the road crosses the path of a second railway line, which once carried the line from Aylsham. Whilst the bank is still evident, it's hard to imagine there was actually a bridge here at all. Speaking of bridges, as you can see, we're crossing the floodplains of the River Wensum. On approach to our next village, Geist, there was once a toll bridge which crossed the river, and you can see it from this current replacement which the road travels on today. Local villagers would have been able to cross for free, but for anyone else, the toll was known for being a penny a wheel. In 1930, the road was realigned to form the current route, and a new bridge was constructed in 2002 to cope with the demands of heavy modern traffic. The village of Geist is situated on the edge of the Seno estate, once owned by Thomas Albert Cook, grandson of the famous travel agent. Despite its quaint appearance with its Dutch-gabled cottages and clock tower, the village as we see it today was actually only constructed in 1929 and was designed as a model village by Cook. However, if you know where to look, traces of the old village remain. On the eastern edge of the village green, beneath the tower of St Andrew's Church, lies a curious portal hidden in the undergrowth. This is the remains of an old lime kiln dating from the first half of the 19th century. Certainly worth a look while we're in the area. Right, enough exploring, back to the beaten track. Slicing across the village is the busy A1067 from Fakenham to Norwich, with the B1110 continuing north of the village green, where our next milestone lies. Once we get to Geist, the style of these milestones changes. They become taller and more square, and they also feature these little metal lugs which stick out. Whilst it would be a romanticism to think that these would perhaps hold lanterns to aid travellers during the night, a more plausible explanation is that these particular style milestones are actually repurposed from old post and chain fencing.
Some of them have these little remains of metal hooks on the side, and I've seen other stones looking like that which support a chain just as a barrier around an entrance. So I wonder, because Norfolk didn't have any local stone that they could use, so the stone had to come in from somewhere else, and of course that cost more money. So I wonder whether these milestones on the Holt to Dereham road were repurposed, reused from somebody's estate.
Beyond the village of Geist, the road climbs north towards Holly Hill. Now the location of our next milestone has a terrible tale linked to it. In 1833, the Norfolk Chronicle reports of an old coal trader who was crushed to death here by his cartwheels whilst trying to wash the coal dust off his throat on the way from Blakeney to Mileham. The milestone is located a short distance along a precarious narrow verge. Ah, here it is. Now, this has been overgrown for quite some time, but I believe Geist Parish Council are on the case, so hopefully this will be gleaming white and visible to passing traffic once more. Right, now we better not linger here for too long. This is a very limited clearance verge and the traffic moves really fast along here, so let's move on. Also in a dangerous position is the next milestone at Wood Norton, which stands along a fast-moving straight section of road. A mile north of Wood Norton is a crossroads with perhaps two of the most unusually pronounced village names. Now, as a Norfolk boy, I believe their correct pronunciations are Fulmerston and Hindleveston respectively, with or without an E at various points throughout their existence. I guess this right here is a Hindleveststone, this wonderfully cared for milestone just past Rawhall Farm. The fields to the west of Rawhall Farm hold a wartime secret. During the Second World War, these fields were actually part of a nationwide deception scheme to foil German bombers. For a short while in the early 1940s, this was the site of a decoy airfield, said to have been laid out with dummy aircraft and earthworks, making it appear as if it was a real working airfield with the intention of attracting enemy bombs, protecting the real aerodrome at RAF West Raynham. Whilst initially successful, with one recorded strike in 1940, as time went on, the daytime decoy became unconvincing and closed. But by night, the site operated an array of fake airfield lighting, and it was all controlled from this surviving bunker. Now, if we have a look inside, we first come into the main operations room, where everything was controlled. And further in, we have an exit passageway, and at the far end, a generator room. Now, this is quite a standard design for a decoy airfield bunker, and on top was apparently an arm mounted, which could move a lamp in an arc to simulate aircraft taxiing. Interesting stuff. Now, back to the road. North of here, the scenery changes as the road winds alongside the glorious Melton Park, passing the village of Swanton Novas. Now, I always think Swanton Novas sounds a little bit like a boy racers club from the 90s, but it actually derives from centuries ago. Swanton is quite a common village name here in Norfolk, and it needed to be distinguished from the other Swantons, so Novas was derived from the name of the family who held the land here in the 13th century. Following the wall of Melton Park, you'd be forgiven for not spotting the next mile marker along the route.
There is a remains of a milestone in the wall around Melton Park. It hasn't got any writing on it now, you can't see it, but you can see the rectangular outline of what was a milestone, and it's marked on earlier maps.
This seemingly featureless stone rectangle is actually the second wall plaque on this journey, which would have displayed the mileage towards Holt and Dereham. Now, we're a couple of hundred yards away from an area known locally as Pig's Grave. There are two versions of this old tale involving a Walter Pigg, allegedly a notorious highwayman who frequented this stretch of route and was hanged at nearby Gallow Hill. Alternatively, and perhaps a less romantic turn of events, Pigg was actually the victim, and it was the robber who was actually hung here, or perhaps it was even a suicide. Certainly before the 1820s, suicide burials often took place at crossroads, supposedly to confuse the tormented spirit so that it might have difficulty in deciding which road to take home. A third, more modern story involves an Arctic lorry carrying pigs overturning in a collision at the busy junction with the Thursford-Ousham Road. I guess all three could be plausible, but it's a truly Norfolk legend as the name has stuck locally. Continuing straight over the B1354, the route then crosses the former Midland and Great Northern Railway line, which ran from Melton Constable to Fakenham. Believe it or not, there was actually a humped road bridge over the line here, but it was demolished in 1992, probably because of its steepness and proximity to the busy road junction. We next enter the village of Briningham, with its twists and turns revealing this rather smart-looking milestone right by the edge of the road outside Staples Cottage, which has quite a story behind it. Now, a few years ago, the Briningham stone was severely damaged in a traffic collision, which saw it completely broken off at the base. Carrying out the repair was Mid-Norfolk stonemason H. Brett of Watton. Keen to find out more, I meet master craftsman Paul Blake, who tells me more about the stone's reconstruction. Now, the stone at Briningham, you had a hand in repairing that rather recently, so tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, that was commissioned by the local parish council, which we located in the Norfolk County Council storage yard at Aylsham, and we finally were able to get the stone to our workshops. The County Council had installed an iron rod into the bottom of the milestone where the break had occurred. We had to take that out and remove that because it was a ferrous material which would have rusted and split the stone. So we only use stainless steel pins in any of our repairs because that doesn't rust and therefore doesn't cause extra damage over the years. The broken stone had been severed at ground level by another vehicle, so it was a road traffic accident, and there was an insurance involved with the final payment. But the stump, the milestone, was very close to an actual building, an old cottage, and therefore we couldn't extract the stump because it would have caused damage to the property. To install the stone back onto the existing stump in the ground, we had to drill out a hole in the stump to insert our steel pin, which we use is about 50 mil in circumference, and that goes up into the bottom of the broken surface stone and then down into the stump below the surface. and then we cement the two together and then point up on site. We came back a few days later when it had all dried out and repainted where the cement joint was. So we were able to restore the top part of the milestone to repair the damage caused by the vehicle, and pointing and then painting and recutting the lettering and painting those black. We had traffic lights there so we could do this work without being a danger to ourselves.
Yes, it's a very precarious position on that bend.
Oh yes, you can see why the car lost it on that bend, because it is a nasty bend there, and it's certainly not a very safe place to work on because you don't see cars coming until they're on top of you. So the traffic lights were very useful on that occasion.
With its fresh coat of paint and refreshed inscription, the Briningham stone certainly stands out. Hopefully its refreshed appearance will be enough to prevent another collision in the future. Leaving Briningham behind as we count down the final few miles towards Holt, the road crisscrosses another former railway line, not once but twice, before reaching our next milestone on the outskirts of Brinton. Now, the railway line we've just crossed will cross again before we reach the town of Holt. We're approaching the Glaven Valley now, and the railway had to meander its path towards Holt in order to navigate the valley's steep gradients. This particular line also ran from Melton Constable, and once carried holidaymakers from the Midlands up to the North Norfolk coastal towns of Sheringham and Cromer via Holt. Whilst the road takes a more direct path across the Glaven Valley, ironically it was the railways that led to the demise of the travelling coaches, and thus quickly outdating the milestones.
I mean, as the railways gradually spread around the country, the stagecoach services closed down because people preferred to go on the railways, they were much faster.
But before crossing the Glaven Valley, the road first winds its way through the peaceful village of Thornage, and just beyond the village is the next milestone. Now, how's that for a view? We're now 123 miles from London, and you can see how steep the Glaven Valley is from here. Whilst the road takes pretty much a straight run up that hill, the railway had to sidewind its way up the gradients. And interestingly enough, our penultimate milestone is just beyond a surviving rail bridge, where the line ran through a cutting on its way up towards Holt. I'm actually parked on top of the bridge here at the crest of Ingmode Hill. Whilst the road is naturally straight, during the construction of the bridge, the road was actually kinked to accommodate the angle of the cutting. But at some point after the railway was dismantled, the road was re-straightened once again, with the bridge partially backfilled, leaving this convenient pull-in just off the side of the road. Beneath me, the bridge still exists, as I went to check it out several years ago and wandered along the old track bed. Now Holt is just a mile away. We're nearly there, folks. Approaching Holt, the road continues climbing, before bringing you out at a roundabout on the relatively modern Holt bypass, which is actually built on the path of the former railway line as it approached Holt station. But just before the roundabout lies a curious patch of land with a bizarre arrangement of hedges and a public footpath leading towards a cul-de-sac aptly named Valley Lane. Believe it or not, this was actually the original road route into the town, but it was the arrival of the railway that prompted its closure, with the road realigned to form the basis of its current route. Whilst the bypass has long since replaced the former railway line, in the early 1880s it was the road which had to make way for the trains. Due to its slow but steady climb up the hills of the Glaven Valley, the railway's path sliced right across this historic roadway in a cutting, with the road realigned alongside, joining the main Norwich Road at Whitehouse Farm. Prior to the roundabout, the roads converged at a T-junction, with a single bridge carrying them across the railway line towards the town. But when the bypass was constructed, the B1110 was aligned once again to follow the path of the trackbed, with the roundabout and pedestrian subway being built on the site of the demolished bridge. If you know where to look, the previous road alignment can still be seen beneath the trees, but the road now known as Valley Lane predates them all as the original route from Dereham. As I approach the town, the end is in sight. At the start of the High Street is Obelisk Plain, and it's the obelisk itself that forms our final milestone. I guess this is quite the trophy for the end of our journey. You can see on each side there are plaques denoting the distance from many towns across Norfolk, and if you look on this side, you'll notice that these are all stately homes. This might be a clue to the obelisk's past.
And the Holt obelisk is interesting because on one side it has distances to some of the main stately homes, apart from the distances to places as well.
The obelisk is said to have originally been one of a pair of gateposts from Melton Park, with the other ending up at Dereham. Did Melton Park have some financial influence over that section of route?
Well, they might have done, yes. Sir Edward Astley, who I think was MP for the area at the time, he was one of the trustees for the Watton Road, so he obviously had an interest in roads and getting to places more easily, with better roads.
The obelisk at Dereham was situated in the area where the War Memorial now stands.
Dereham unfortunately got rid of theirs in 1946, but the Holt one is still there.
During the Second World War, the mileage plaques were said to have been plastered over with whitewash to confuse the Germans.
The invasion scare in May 1940, the government thought the Nazis were going to invade us, and they decided that to make it difficult for any invader to know where they were, they first of all ordered all fingerposts, signposts to be taken up, and then they realised there were lots of other things around the country that could tell someone where they were, and particularly milestones, so they ordered that milestones would either have to be dug up and buried or taken away, or if that wasn't possible then they had to be defaced.
So now we reach the end of our journey north from Dereham. Just up the high street, the coaching inn, the Feathers Hotel, would have accommodated weary travellers, and the port of Cley is just a few miles further north. As we look back on our journey, it's amazing to see just how much history survives. We've seen cathedral ruins, a village pound, an underground lime kiln, a decoy airfield, former railway relics, and an old toll bridge, as well as the countless milestones which still line the route.
People tend to notice them as they travel along the road now, whereas before they wouldn't have done.
Whilst journeys now take minutes rather than days, it's easy to take all these sites for granted, but each one helps tell the story of why this Norfolk B Road is the way it is today. Thanks for watching. Now for the obligatory closing paragraph. If you enjoy my quirky, if slightly self-indulgent adventures, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.